This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
5 out of 5 for the Jason Hartman podcast. Thanks to his teachings, I have no worries about my future. My future is bright, and that for my family. I recommend the Jason Hartman team to anybody who is interested in financial freedom by way of real estate investing. 5 out of 5.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome and good morning. This is episode 1772 of the Creating Wealth Show. Our guest today will be yours truly. Yes, we have part 2 of a speech I gave recently about the Hartman Comparison Index and talking about inflation and so forth. So we will get to that in just a moment. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about something I have been beating the drum about for many years, almost 2 decades, and that is inflation. But before I even do that, I want to make a disclaimer. And here's the disclaimer. I got back from Scottsdale, Arizona last night, and I had to fly into Tampa because my car was in Tampa. And I just didn't feel like leaving my car across the state of Florida. And, you know, when I got there about midnight. It was kind of a crazy schedule. And I just felt like I had enough energy to just drive across the state of Florida and forget about staying in a hotel, which I had originally planned to do. But sometimes you just really want to be back in your own house, sleeping in your own bed. So I got to bed at 5 a.m., which is something I rarely do. I'm usually getting up at 5 a.m. Early to bed, early to rise makes a person healthy, wealthy, and wise, as the saying goes. And I think that's true. I think it's good to be in harmony with nature, right? In the cycles of nature. When it gets dark, we should be thinking about sleeping. And when it's light, we should be thinking about being up and out and awake. So I have not taken a shower yet. And about the only thing I've accomplished so far this morning is walking the dog. But speaking of dogs, we've got some little pooches on the screen here. And as part of the Hartman Comparison Index, this is the best index for valuing real estate and understanding where it is going, predicting, and we have a component of it called the Hartman Predictive Index, for understanding where the prices of housing, where the prices of real estate are going, if it's overvalued, if it's undervalued, if it's fairly valued. And part of that index is the Forbes index, which I discovered many years ago. And this is like a CPI, a consumer price index for the extremely affluent people. Now, what is considered extremely affluent or ultra rich varies depending on who you're asking, right? And they're talking about billionaires here, but it's not really. Anybody with a net worth of 30 million or above is mostly considered to be ultra wealthy. So, you know, we all have our own inflation rate. We have a personal inflation rate. Look, this is why nobody can agree on how bad inflation really is, because everybody has a different way of spending. And that means everybody has a personal inflation rate. You spend differently than I spend, and things that we spend money on inflate or stay the same or deflate in price at different rates. So we all have our own personal inflation rate. But when you segment the economy by different socioeconomic classes, Certainly the poor spend money on life's necessities, like cigarettes and tattoos and drugs and alcohol. I'm joking. Well, not completely, but a lot of people are sadly in the poorer classes of society because they have been the victim of various addictions and so forth. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people who are just, they haven't figured it out, or they've had bad luck. They didn't start out well in life. I certainly didn't start out well in life, but I had a couple of lucky breaks that, had I not seen that real estate infomercial with that guru when I was 16 years old, maybe I would have never become interested in the most historically proven asset class in the world, income property. That changed my life, right? It was a lucky break. And at age 17, a year later, had I not discovered my 4 great mentors, Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, Earl Nightingale, and Dennis Waitley, maybe I just wouldn't have discovered them. And maybe I never would have had exposure to the thoughts that we make our own way in life, and we've got to take responsibility for our own actions. And, maybe I would have never been inspired to change my life the way I did. And going back a couple of years, in 9th grade, when I really noticed the difference in socioeconomic classes, I went to an integrated school in Los Angeles in junior high school. It had all sorts of socioeconomic classes. It had the really poor kids bust in from South Central Los Angeles. And sadly, I was mugged in the hallways at school multiple times, once at knife point, for change in my pockets, right? So I'm tougher than I look, okay? I grew up in some pretty tough neighborhoods. But I also saw the rich kids in my school. And, they lived in an area called Cheviot Hills. And the Cheviot Hills kids, no, they weren't 90210, but they were pretty close, right? They were the children of movie producers and celebrities. And noticing the difference in these classes in 9th grade and junior high school, I really thought, that's the good life. I want to be part of that group. And I wasn't part of that group, but I wanted to be. I aspired to be part of that group. And that motivated me. One of the things I noticed is all the pretty girls were hanging out with those kids, right? And, I wanted to be part of that group, not part of my group, right? So all of these things, right, they changed me and they influenced me. And maybe you had those things change you and influence you, or obviously different influences, right? But there's definitely an element of luck, and there's definitely an element of misfortune in life. No question about it, right? No one can deny that. But like Earl Nightingale says, luck is what happens when preparedness meets opportunity, right? We all have opportunities in life. And for the unprepared, the opportunity only makes them look foolish. Hey, considering that I only got 3 hours of sleep, I'm doing pretty good, aren't I? 1 cup of coffee. I haven't even had the 2nd cup yet. So anyway, yeah, so that changes us, right? But we all have our different inflation rate. The poor spend money on necessities. So when the price of gasoline goes up, that really hurts the poor. When the price of groceries go up, that really hurts the poor. And it helps the rich, because the rich own stock in the companies that sell this stuff. And the stock value goes up. And they own real estate, of course, and they leverage their real estate, and they take advantage of my strategy of inflation-induced debt destruction. So they get huge benefits from that, right? And then there's this like slew of articles in the media, I can't freaking believe it, that is trying to convince people that inflation is good for the poor. I mean, talk about fake news. That is I don't know how these reporters, they should actually have liability for writing stuff like that. They should be sued for spreading such falsehoods. I mean, it's just unbelievable that the media can get away with the things they get away with. It's incredible. But anyway, before we get into the second half of my speech about the Hartman Comparison Index, and we learn more about how to value income properties, or properties in general, not just income properties. See, I do need more sleep. Okay. Let's look at the inflation rate, not the consumer price index, but let's look at the consumer price index for billionaires, for the extremely rich. And you don't have to be a billionaire, but just for wealthy people. And Forbes has been publishing this index, and I've followed it for many, many years, that the cost of living extremely well, the name has varied a little bit over the years, but you get the idea, right? So it's getting more expensive to live like a billionaire, is what the title of the article says. A kilo of caviar, a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Forbes has tracked the cost of the good life for 40 years now. It costs a lot to be rich, they say, and it's only gotten pricier over the past year. Forbes has been keeping tabs on the cost of the good life since 1982. Tracking a basket of ultra luxury items. So the consumer price index tracks a basket of goods, right? The CPI. And of course, it's massively manipulated. And I've taught you about that many times over the years. The three major ways they manipulate the CPI. And they always have a huge incentive. They, meaning the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the government, whatever, has this huge incentive to make inflation appear lower than it really is. And they manipulate it down through weighting, substitution, and hedonic indexing. Boy, I haven't even brushed my hair. This is bad, folks. But hey, we're all friends. You're not going to judge me by looking like slovenly, right? So that's what they do. So Forbes decided they should create their own basket of goods, right? The cost of living very well, or the cost of living extremely well, the CLEWI, right? Well, this year it's up 10.1%, and that's the biggest jump since 2008. Now, what is really interesting about that statement? 2008, that was the Great Recession. But once again, whenever these events happen, whether it be COVID 1984, the Great Recession, the rich always seem to get the wealth transferred to them, because this is part of the Cantillion effect, which I've taught you about over the years. Richard Cantillion, the economist, postulated that the people closest to the money get the most of it. And that's why there is a massive wealth transfer that's been going on during these pandemic times. And by the way, scrolling across the bottom of your screen, if you're watching this on video, is a link. And you should go get my free report on pandemic investing. Just go to pandemicinvesting.com, real easy, pandemicinvesting.com, and request that free report. It'll be emailed to you instantly. There's no cost, no strings attached. It's just my strategies adopted. See, I haven't had enough sleep. Adapted for the crazy times in which we live. Okay, so the cost of living extremely well index jumped 10.1%. Well, the consumer price index over the same period only rose 5.3%, which, by the way, is extremely high comparatively. And we know it's manipulated down because it's fake news, but whatever. That's the official number, 5.3%. Now, the more recent stat was 6.2%. Okay, so, I'm just tracking Forbes is just tracking the same period. So we're comparing apples to apples. All right. Okay. Let's take a look. They say it's a combination of all three factors, right? There's the raw materials cost, the manufactured goods, and labor shortages thanks to the pandemic. Okay. But look at the chart. This is staggering, right? And you see how it's gotten out of sync at times over the years. The green line is the Forbes 400 total net worth, because there's a massive wealth transfer that's been going on ever since Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971. On that fateful day on August 15th, 1971. And it's just been a massive wealth transfer. The rich keep getting so much richer, and everybody else is kind of plodding along, but the rich are getting a lot richer. So the green line is the Forbes 400 total net worth. The gray line is the consumer price index, which is fake news, of course. And the black line is the CLEWI, the cost of living extremely well index by Forbes, right? And we see that the CPI has always been the lowest. The Forbes 400 net worth has been just insanely high, right? And the cost of living extremely well index has outpaced the CPI. So while the expenses to live extremely well have gone up. All those private jets and, Gucci handbags and, Tiffany things and, whatever, right? Opera tickets, all that stuff. The rich have outpaced their rate of inflation quite dramatically. So they've gotten a lot richer, even though their cost of living has gone up more than the CPI by the official stats. They've gotten way, way richer. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples. So one category they have is entertainment and toys. That's up 6.1%. So opera is 0%, but 2 tickets to 6 Saturday night performances, the premium seats, the Metropolitan Opera in New York, okay, that's $5,700. So that's actually a 0% increase. Okay. A piano, they pick one, right? This is a Steinway and Sons, a certain specific model, $187,000. That's up 3%. A motor yacht, $6,855,000. That's up 11.2%. That's a Viking 75 priced in New Jersey. Okay. A sailing yacht, $3.4 million. That's up 30.8%. And that's an Oyster 595, right? Sporting shotguns are up 3.9%. I mean, all this stuff. Thoroughbred horse is $421,000. Now, they don't have, that's new in the index, so they don't have a comparison. A train set is $200, up 0%. Cigars, $877 for a box of these, certain types of cigars, up 0%. Forbes magazine is up 0%. They even put their own magazine in here. Fashion is up 10.8%. Okay. And then they've got a bunch of things in that category, right? Men's black calf wingtip shoes, custom made, John Lobb, United Kingdom. Those are up 12.8%. A dress is up 0%. Okay. But shirts, 12 cotton bespoke Turnbull and Acer shirts made in the UK, up 12%. Okay. Gucci loafers are up 5.3%. Oh, hey, there's my watch. I have this watch. I have this exact watch almost. This is a Royal Oak Audemars Piguet watch, an AP. That's up 34%. Now, this is not the exact one I have. Mine's up actually more than this one. I was shocked to learn my watch that I think I paid like $12,000 for it years ago, around 2007, is now worth about $75,000. I was shocked. I had no idea it was worth that much. And it makes me want to not wear it because I'm afraid of the danger of wearing it. But this version of that same brand, that AP watch, this one's got a blue face, mine has a white face. The Royal Oak is now $23,900 and it's up 34.3%. That is amazing how much these fine watches have gone up. So we see that the food and drink part of the index is up 12.2%. Caviar is up 0%. That's good. And champagne was just added to the index. That's kind of surprising. That wasn't in there before. Household items up 15.7%. Yeah, so it just goes kind of through this. A tennis court will now cost you $58,000. That's up 4.4% if you want to add a tennis court to your home. They've got private schools, facelifts. How much does a facelift cost now? That's up 51%. Wow. Yikes. That's now $32,000, I guess. I guess the price is up quite a bit for that. An estate manager to manage your estate is more expensive, but that's a new thing in the index. That's $380,000. Wow. That's in the minimum salary in the San Francisco area. So, okay. Oh, if you want to go see the shrink for your mental health, that's now up 12.5%. That's $450 for 45 minutes to see a psychiatrist on the Upper East Side of New York City. Wow. Folks, figure out how to work out your own problems. Get some self-counseling online. Read some self-help books. That's really expensive. Have some good friends that you can have good conversations with. Lawyer for estate planning, $1,250 an hour, which, by the way, if you have not taken advantage of our fantastic partnership with our attorney who does estate planning, asset protection, tax saving strategies, trusts, LLCs. That is the deal of the century. I mean, that is such a good deal. You can watch a free class on that and learn how to engage him for the bargain price of literally less than $3,000 to work out a whole plan for you. It's an incredible deal. Just go to jasonhartman.com/protect. That's jasonhartman.com/protect. This is one of those things that is really quite easy to just take care of, but you must do it in advance. You must do it in advance. So that link again, jasonhartman.com/protect. PROTECT, like protect your assets. Okay. jasonhartman.com/protect. Go check out that free class. Even if you don't engage him, you'll learn a lot. It's a very good lesson there. Okay. So, travel cost, 4.1% increase. Airplanes are way up, by the way, folks. I've been airplane shopping a little bit recently, and the prices are insanely high, but the index doesn't show it that way. And this is how indexes can be faulty. They price a Learjet 75. Now, I thought Lear was in bankruptcy, but I don't know. This is 9.9 million and up 0%, which is not actually accurate at all. The private jets, those are up about a third to, in some cases, double in 1 year, by the way, because there is such a shortage of them. It's absolutely crazy. So anyway, that's what the index does. That's the CPI for the wealthy folks. Okay. Now, don't feel sorry for them. Follow their lead. Do what they do. Follow my plan. With income property, use inflation-induced debt destruction. Have inflation benefit you. Have it help you. And lots more on the podcast and on my YouTube channel about all of these things and how you can do it. You can also reach out, talk with one of our investment counselors, our team members, by just going to jasonhartman.com, or get the pandemic investing book. We'll reach out to you that way, or sign up for the asset protection, the free class, and we'll connect with you that way. There are lots of ways you can connect with us, real easy. All right, without further ado, let's get to my speech on the Hartman Comparison Index, a truly unique way to value real estate. And I say it is the best way because it answers the question, compared to what? And that is life's most important question. But we can apply that to economics, to valuation of income property. And that's what we need to do. We need to answer the compared to what question. And that's what we're going to do right now on the podcast. Now, most people think that the transfer of wealth between the generations is through inheritance. And that's true. That is one way. But there's a way that it happens while everybody's still alive, through inflation. Why is that? Well, because most young people have debts. And most older people, hopefully, have assets. They have savings, stocks, bonds, and equity in real estate. And guess what? The savings, stocks, bonds, and equity in real estate get diminished through inflation, and so does the debt. So the debt of the young people actually gets repaid. It's an intergenerational wealth transfer without anybody dying or inheriting. So it's a pretty amazing mechanism, really. Now, one of the things I always say is that when the government is broke, it becomes predatory against its citizens. And sadly, this is true. It's one of the reasons I left California, because I noticed my former home state that I lived in most of my life, the Socialist Republic of California, became very predatory. I remember one time when I just had it. I was just so done. You know, I had several offices back when we used to have offices. We're a virtual company since 2012. You know, we used to have big offices, expensive offices. And I remember one day we moved into a new office in Irvine, California. And some inspector came in, a government bureaucrat. And, you know, I had real estate agents. And real estate agents are never in the office, right? It's common for them to share an office, right? And in this little office we had, there were 2 desks in one office. And the inspector comes in and says, oh, wait, you know, in this office, because you have 2 desks, which nobody's even ever at the 2 desks, much less 1 desk, you have to put a strobe light and a fire alarm in here, and it'll be $2,700. And if you don't do it, we're going to fine you. And I'm like, this state has become so predatory against the citizens, I'm just done. So I left California and moved to Arizona. But this is what happens, right? And one of the ways they're becoming predatory is through inflation and financial repression. So let's take a look at a real life example. In 1972, that dollar was worth $1. Okay, that's fine. No inflation happened yet in 1972. We're talking about the same time period. But by 1984, which, by the way, how many of you read the book by George Orwell? It's all happening. It's all coming true. Read the book again. Okay, you got to read 1984, the book, and Fahrenheit 451, and Atlas Shrugged, and Brave New World. That would be another good one because it's all coming true, sadly. Okay, and we need to be aware of it. By 1984, that dollar was only worth 40 cents. Okay, so the value of the dollar had declined. It lost 60% of its value in 12 short years. And this is, we were off the gold standard by then, right? By 2001, it was worth 24 cents. So if someone got a 30-year mortgage, a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, they saw a lot of inflation-induced debt destruction. This is not a theory. It happened to tens of millions of people, and maybe around the world, hundreds of millions of people, but tens of millions just in the US. They saw the value of their debts massively decline. So in 1972, you would borrow on a mortgage at 7.37%. That was the interest rate back then. Makes you realize how incredibly cheap mortgage rates are now. Money is super cheap right now. Negative interest rates, and that's a way we can all win by using leverage in a fund, on our other investments, and so forth. So these people borrowed, millions of people borrowed, got mortgages at 7.37%. But after inflation, over that 3-decade process, the real rate they were paying was 1.06%. Isn't that incredible? Say, that's incredible, right? Okay, yeah, that's incredible. Okay, but remember, mortgage interest is tax deductible. So at the typical tax rate, of course everybody's tax rate's different, I get it, but the typical tax rate, after inflation and after tax benefits on an owner-occupied home, they got paid to borrow. They were paying, or getting paid, negative 1.16%. Isn't that amazing? This happened to millions of people, and that's why homeowners got so rich and others got left behind, right? Because they just simply got inflation-induced debt destruction. They got to live in a house for 3 decades for free, and they actually got paid, right? So not free, got paid to live there. So huge benefit. So here's the example. Typical mortgage size, just over $14,000. In nominal dollars, the name of them, they repaid about $36,000. In real dollars, they only repaid $16,300. And after tax real dollars, $12,000. So you see the negative interest rates there. But today, it's dramatically better than that. Okay, let's talk about part 2. And let's see, how's my time doing? Okay, I got another 2 hours. Okay, fine. Right, Bridger? 2 more hours. So let's talk about measuring sticks. Now, why do I say that? Here's the reason. Let's go back to that, what we started with at the beginning, the bubble question. Are we in a bubble, right? Who thinks we're in a bubble? Asset prices are just too high. They've called it the everything bubble, right? Come on, raise your hand. Right, okay. Who doesn't think we're in a bubble? Yeah, who's not voting? Oh, there we go again. How many people are married? How many are single? How many aren't sure? No, people just aren't voting. Okay, so here's the problem with this bubble question, is that people are using only one measuring stick, and that is a huge mistake. And the measuring stick they're using is the dollar. Why would you only compare things to one thing to try and determine the value of something? Look, even if you shop for something expensive or you need a quote for something, say you need a new roof on your house, hopefully you're going to get 3 quotes, right? You're going to at least compare it to 3 things. But with real estate prices and other asset prices, we just compare it to one thing, the dollar. But the dollar is a moving target. The dollar's worth is changing constantly. It is a huge flaw that could lead to big mistakes to only use the dollar as a measuring stick. Okay, let's talk about real estate specifically. There are 3 types of real estate markets. Now, in the United States, there are almost 400 what's called MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, right? That's a mouthful, more than inflation-induced debt destruction. And there are over 3,100 counties in the US. I don't even know how many cities there are. It's a big country. There's no such thing as a national housing market in a country as large and diverse as the United States. There are only a bunch of local markets. But to help make it simpler, I think we can divide this into 3 types of markets. 3 broad categories. And this is also true worldwide, not just in the US. So one type is linear markets. These are the slow and steady markets. Okay, these are the markets that are very profitable, have good cash flow. These are the types of markets around the country that my company helps people buy properties in. These good, stable, linear markets. Very reliable. And I'll show you some charts of the differences in these. Cyclical markets. These are the markets that are in the news. These are the markets that get all the attention. These are the markets I would not recommend investing in because they're too expensive, they have bad cash flow, and they're much more volatile. If you're looking at a chart, they look like a roller coaster, up and down, right? When they're peaking and they're going up, it's glorious. But when they go down, it's really tragic, right? So that's the cyclical market. And then hybrid markets that are just in between the two. 3 types of markets. Now, let me give you an example of these. In the US, cyclical markets would be places like where I grew up, Los Angeles. They would be San Francisco, Seattle, pretty much the west coast of the US, right? They would also be South Florida. Miami would be a cyclical market. I don't live too far from Miami. They would be the expensive northeastern markets, Boston, Washington, D.C., New York, of course, cyclical markets. And the rest of the country is pretty much linear. Around the world, cyclical markets are these trophy cities. London, Paris, Dubai, Hong Kong, right? These are the markets we hear about. Vancouver in Canada is probably the most cyclical market in the world, actually. And the rest of the world is pretty much linear. Some are hybrid, there's some hybrid spots, but most of the world, most of the country is a linear market, right? But it doesn't get much attention. So here's a chart. Here's what Memphis, a linear market, looks like. We've helped hundreds and hundreds of people invest in Memphis over the years. It's just a great cash flow market, large renter population, the logistics capital of the US, really linear. So the chart looks fairly boring there. This, however, is Miami. More pronounced ups and downs, more like a roller coaster. Okay, this is Indianapolis, another market we've been in for a long, long time. Very linear, very boring. I mean, there's like only one exciting thing in Indianapolis, the Indy 500. Everything else is super boring. Okay, sorry if you're from Indianapolis, but it's a good place to invest. This is Los Angeles. Look at that. I mean, talk about a roller coaster. You'll lose your mind investing in a market like this. These are the very this is the conservative versus crazy markets, okay? It's the old tale of the tortoise and the hare, right? Who wins the race? The slow and steady wins the race, right? Okay, so let's go back to that gold standard discussion. 1971 was our last connection of the dollar to gold, and look what happened. Look at how inflation just started taking off right after that. In fact, I've long had a theory about this. I think that Richard Nixon, remember Richard Nixon's, of course, on August 15th, 1971, he gave the speech about how we're going to temporarily suspend the convertibility of gold or dollars to gold, right? Close the gold window, as everyone calls it. But shortly after that, he took a very famous trip, a diplomatic trip to where? China. I think Nixon, although I've never read or heard this anywhere, it's just my own theory, I think Nixon knew that massive inflation was coming. And he needed to make relations with China a super cheap labor market that could eventually become the workshop of the world. And it did. And China alone, along with other globalization and immigration, not saying that the immigration policy is right, but the government just did the immigration policies and the trade policies to hide the real inflation rate. The only question is, where's the next China? Right? China's prices have come up. Their wages have come up. Their standard of living has come up. So the ability to hide inflation in the future will be diminished because globalization already happened. And it's lifted a lot of people around the world out of poverty. That's great. But where's the next cheap labor market? I mean, they're trying to do this in Africa, but remember, Africa's not one country. It's a whole bunch of countries, very fragmented. A lot of languages, a lot of different, belief systems there. So it's not like China, okay? And that will be very different. So you see that inflation took off. Now, if you look at the Case-Shiller Home Price Index versus the Consumer Price Index, the most widely used real estate index is Case-Shiller, and the most widely used inflation index is the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. You see how those get out of sync at some points, right? Okay, well, let's look at a couple of these indexes real fast. Case-Shiller index, super widely used, it sucks. Quote me on that. This index sucks, okay? It's no good, don't use it, okay? Why? Because it only profiles 20 markets. And guess what? 15 of the 20, 2/3 of them, are cyclical markets. Or not 2/3, 3/4. I can't even do math. I need more coffee. Okay, so those are cyclical markets. Why would you only profile cyclical markets? It doesn't give you a good piece of information. Now, this one's better. This one's published by NAR, the National Association of Realtors, the Housing Affordability Index. I like this one because what it basically does is takes the median mortgage payment and compares it to the median income. And it tells you in an area how many people can afford a house. That's pretty good. But guess what? It has some flaws. It doesn't include foreign money coming into a market. So for example, when I owned my traditional real estate company years ago, back in Southern California, I eventually sold that to Coldwell Banker. We had all of this foreign money just pouring into the market, a lot of Chinese money, Middle Eastern money, et cetera. And the Housing Affordability Index doesn't even see that. It's totally blind to it. It also doesn't see the people that bought houses in a certain area years ago and are moving around just trading equity. They don't have the income that would make the house affordable. They're just trading big chunks of equity in Newport Beach, California, right? So this has its flaw, but it's not bad. Now, one index is my second favorite. It's the first American title, publishes something called the Real House Price Index. And guess what it says? It says that house prices in the last 21 years are now 26.8% cheaper than they were 21 years ago. Do you believe that? Well, this is my second favorite index, but let's get to my favorite. The index, the only index that really asks compared to what? Life's most important question. This is the question we are constantly playing in our heads, I think. Compared to what? If we're single, or maybe not, and you go online to an online dating site, what do? Compared to what? Compared to my ex, compared to the other one I just looked at, right? Swipe left, swipe right, all this, it's really weird world we live in, right? But we are comparing. Human beings compare. This is what we do all day. How do you know if the food is good? Well, you're gonna compare it to another meal you had to know if it's better or worse, right? How do you know if you're rich or poor? Because you look around and you see everybody else and you say, compared to what? This is life's biggest question, compared to what? So I created an index that basically does this. It answers the question, is it cheap or is it expensive? And it is called the Hartman Comparison Index. Now, as I started developing this index that I hope will become a really, used thing in the media and so forth, it is comparing things, right? So let's just look and try to answer if real estate's cheap or expensive by using the index. Okay, let's look at gold. Now, I'm not a fan of gold, I'm not a gold bug, but gold has been considered money for 5,000 years. You cannot deny that it is a measuring stick other than the dollar. They say that 5,000 years ago, you could have bought the equivalent of a man's toga and a pair of sandals. Today, you can buy a man's suit and a pair of shoes, right? It's like the same thing, right? It's very consistent with its value. So in 1970, the median house price was just over $22,000. Follow where my mouse cursor is. Gold was $35. We were still on the gold standard, so that was a government price, basically. And it cost you 646 ounces of gold to buy the median price house. You needed a decent sized suitcase to carry all that gold into the closing table to buy the house. Okay, fair enough. 10 years later, by 1980, in dollars, the house price had tripled. It was $66,000, yet you could fit the gold in a much smaller briefcase because it only cost 102 ounces of gold 10 years later to buy a house that everyone thought was more expensive because they were measuring it only in one thing, dollars. Mistake, mistake, mistake. And I'll show you a lot of other reasons it's a mistake. So let's look at today. Today, as of last month, the median house price is $380,000, and it will cost you 212 ounces of gold to buy that house that everybody thinks is so expensive. Okay, it's more expensive than it was in 1980, but it's cheaper than it was, in June it was a little cheaper, but it's cheaper than it was pretty much everywhere else except 1980, right? In fact, compared to 51 years ago, it's 1/3 the price, approximately. So the question I want you to answer is, priced in gold, is housing cheap or expensive? Cheaper. Okay, we established that, it's cheaper. How about this one? How about oil? Oil is arguably the world's most important commodity, at least now. Yes, I get alternative energy and, tree huggers and love them all, okay? But today, oil is still the thing, okay? I don't care what you say, oil is the thing. So in 1970, when oil was $3 a barrel, you would have had to pull up to the title company with multiple trucks of barrels of oil with 6,700 barrels of oil to buy a house. Today, 51 years later, you only need 5,600 barrels, 5,590, to buy that more expensive house priced in dollars. So priced in oil, is it cheap or expensive? Cheaper. It's not super cheap, but it's cheaper, right? Okay. Well, what about rice? Rice is the commodity that is basically the food supply for 2/3 of the human race. Priced in rice, a very important commodity that is food to 2/3 of the world, in 1970, you would need 43,000 units of hundredweight rice. Today, you only need 27,000 units as of June. M6 means month 6, okay? So this one's not updated to September. But 27,000, okay? So it's not the cheapest it's been. In 1990, housing was the cheapest priced in rice, but priced in dollars, it was, double what it was 10 years earlier. So you can just see the progression here, right? But today it is cheaper. Now, here's one for you. How about the S&P 500? This is a good gauge for how the economy is doing, right? The S&P 500 index, great index. So in 1970, it would take 243 shares of the S&P to buy the median price house. As of June of this year, it only takes 80 shares of the S&P to buy the median price house. So just think about this for a minute. In these other commodities that are in the index, if someone is saving, just picture like a young couple saving for their first house, and they think it's probably going to take 10 years to save. So they get paid every month, or every 2 weeks, whatever. They get paid, and instead of storing that money, that pay in cash, in dollars, they convert it to something. They could convert it to gold or rice or oil or S&P shares, right? They convert every paycheck to the other commodity, the other measuring stick, rather than dollars. Well, if they do that, how are they going to look 10 years later? The house might get a lot cheaper for them. Sometimes it gets more expensive. I'll give you one example, orange juice. Priced in orange juice, which I don't think I have that chart here, housing has become actually quite a bit more expensive. But hey, you could save money on the orange juice by adding some champagne, that's a mimosa, put some vodka, it's a screwdriver. Okay, so there's options here, okay? So only 80 shares of the S&P to buy a house today. Well, what about rich people? The Forbes magazine has an index called the Cost of Living Very Well Index. Now, some of you, this is your CPI, right? It's not the typical person's CPI, it's the cost of living very well. Well, for rich people, in 1970, it would be 581 shares of the Cost of Living Very Well Index to buy a house. And today, it's 506 shares. So it's a little cheaper. Here, priced in median income, okay? So here, it would take you 2.6 years to buy a house on the median income in 1970. Today, it's more expensive. Takes you 4.8 years. But wait, there's more. Let me show you this. Okay, here's copper. Copper, it's more expensive, okay, but not the most expensive it's ever been. Haircuts. How many haircuts, if you're a hairstylist, do you have to do to buy a house? Well, in 1970, $9,100, today $9,600, a little more expensive in haircuts, right? But it's not about the price, and this is what I'll end with here. It's not about the price, it's about the payment, because the vast majority of people finance their house, obviously, right? Okay, well, let's take a look here. Mortgage payments. In 1970, when the index starts, the typical mortgage payment for the median price home was $142. Now, if you adjust that for inflation, 51 years later, for the official inflation rate, it's only gone up to $196. It's a little more, but not much. And here's the big flaw here. The official inflation rate, the CPI, is a total freaking scam, okay? It's totally understated. They use three basic things I talked about on my video with Bridger that you should watch because I'd like to get it over 1 million views. That would be cool. Wouldn't it be cool, Bridger? Okay, we're at like 840,000 now, so please watch it and share it with your friends. So they manipulate the index in three major ways: weighting, substitution, and hedonic indexing. So weighting, they have this basket of goods in the CPI. They just say, you know, if it gets out of whack and it seems like inflation's too high, we'll just change the weighting of the elements in the basket of goods. Okay, substitution. Beef prices went way up. Well, we'll just assume that everybody will switch to chicken, but chicken's a dirty bird and I like beef better, right? So they're not going to count. Hedonic indexing. That's the story of the iPhone. So the $1,500 iPhone is better than the old phone, and even if it's the same price, they assume you pay less because the item got better because technology improved it. Now that's logical, but guess what? It says to us, we as people aren't entitled to progress. The consumer price index gets the progress, not us, right? Everything should become better, faster, and cheaper over time. That's called progress, okay? What about the mortgage payment priced in troy ounces of gold? 4.1 in 1970, 0.9 in 1980, 2.1 in 1990, but today it's cheaper than it's ever been to make your mortgage payment in gold. In barrels of oil, it only takes 16 barrels per month to pay your payment. Not the cheapest. 2010, it was a couple barrels cheaper, but it's pretty darn cheap. Shares of the S&P. 1970, 1.5 shares to pay your mortgage. By 1980, it went up. It was 5.3, and then you see what happened over the years, but today it's the cheapest it's ever been to pay your mortgage in shares of the S&P. How about hours worked at the average wage? 41 in 1970. It went up, it peaked at 83 in 1990, but today it's 46. A little more expensive than it was 51 years ago, but not much, okay? And I don't have time for questions, I don't think. So anyway, that's it for me. Feel free to connect with me. I love Voxer, by the way. It's a great app. Russell Brunson got me into it. Happy investing to all of you. Thank you very much. Okay, stand up, everybody. We're going to take a picture. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.